Right now, half of the country, my half, is watching a winter storm crawling towards us in real time. Phones are buzzing with alerts, maps are lighting up in these angry shades of red and white and purple and various colors, and grocery stores are filled with people grabbing bread and milk and batteries because apparently we're going to make a milk sandwich, I don't know, and whatever else feels comforting when a forecast uses words like historic and dangerous. And we may not know exactly how bad this storm's going to be. They're calling for 18 inches of snow where I am, which actually I have to say is kind of cute because I used to live in the mountains above Los Angeles where it didn't really count as a storm unless you got 2 feet. But I live on the East Coast now where you don't get monster storms like that. So, it's a big deal. There's some things that we do know about it. We're going to know the timing and how much of snow is going to drop and how long it's going to stay. That kind of certainty, though, would have been unimaginable in Tudor England. The Tudors lived with winter the way you live with an unpredictable animal. You know it's going to arrive, you know it's going to be dangerous, but you have zero warning when it's going to turn from merely cold into something that's actually truly threatening. There weren't any forecasts. There weren't Storm Tracker, News 8's Global Storm Tracker Predictor, anything like that. There wasn't the interactive radar, no sense of if a snowfall would last for a night or lock you indoors for weeks. And that difference really matters because in the Tudor world, a winter storm wasn't just an inconvenience. It could be quite deadly. Food moved slowly, even in good weather. Markets depended on passable roads. Fuel had to be gathered and stored long before the cold set in. When a snow fell heavily or frost lingered, the entire system just fell apart. People didn't rush out to prepare when a storm was predicted. They prepared for winter as a season and then hoped that nothing went terribly wrong. The Tudors were also living through the kind of mid stages of what we now call the Little Ice Age, this period from around 1300 to 1850, when European winters grew colder than they had been for centuries. We don't think about the fact that it used to be much warmer in England. I think it was the Romans actually grew grapes for wine in southern England. So it was much different. And the Tudors were living through the Little Ice Age, which wasn't a sudden shift, but a gradual cooling that made harsh winters much more common and milder ones more rare. The Thames froze much more frequently. Harvests became less reliable. Winters lasted longer and were harder. So as we watch all of this modern storm prep unfold, and I'm about to go to the grocery store after I record this, the lines, the planning, the anxious scrolling, I've been watching the weather forecast every couple of hours. The question becomes, how did people cope when winter arrived with no warning at all? Get comfy, grab a warm beverage, settle in, my friend, because today we are going to talk about how the Tudors prepped for snowstorms, if they prepped for snowstorms, and some memorable winters in Tudor history. Well, we can look back on it now and say it's memorable. For them, it was probably actually pretty bad, but memorable winters. So let's get started. Hey friend, welcome back to the YouTube channel for the Renaissance English History Podcast. I am your host, Heather, and I've been podcasting on Tudor England since 2009 with my show, which makes it the original Tudor history show. I am, as always, delighted that you are here with me today to talk about Tudor storm prep, Tudor winter prep, which it's, I was thinking about the fact that I'm going out to the grocery store. I have a list 8 miles long. I don't know how long I think I'm going to be indoors for. I'm preparing for 6 months. I mean, it's going to be a week, if that. But, and also I live walking distance to a grocery store. So again, I don't know why I'm doing this, but there's something primal in my brainstem that I see these maps saying 12 to 18 inches of snow. And I'm like, dude, got to get some bread and milk and eggs, right? You just you gotta do it. It's ingrained. Anyway, it made me think about how the Tudors prepared, the frost fairs that used to happen on the Thames. I've done an episode on the frost fairs on the Thames, which I will link to. All kinds of stuff. So let's dig in and talk about the Tudors and winter. So when we talk about weather forecasting in the Tudor period, it helps to clear something up immediately. There was no forecasting in anything like a modern sense. There weren't any instruments or data models or short-term predictions. The Tudors didn't ask whether snow would fall on Thursday or how many inches to expect. They were trying to read signs. Most weather knowledge came from observation and experience. People would pay very close attention to patterns that they believed repeated themselves year after year after year. Sudden stillness in the air, heavy low clouds, or frost that refused to lift were all taken as warnings that conditions were worsening. The wind direction also mattered, though beliefs about what different winds meant varied from place to place. But these were signals, they weren't forecasts. They could tell you that winter was tightening its grip, not what was about to happen next. Another major source of expectation came from almanacs. These were some of the most popular printed books in Tudor England. They were owned by farmers, householders, and tradespeople. Almanacs blended many different things together: seasonal calendars, astrology, religious symbolism, and beliefs about how the year usually unfolded. They might predict that a winter would be sharp or bitter, or that certain months were likely to bring hardship. What they didn't do was warn anybody that a storm was going to be arriving on Saturday night around 1 o'clock in the morning. Almanacs shaped mindset more than action. They encouraged people to expect hardship, not to prepare for a single specific event. And because they often contradicted one another, they reinforced the idea that weather was ultimately unpredictable and beyond human control. That sense of uncertainty then was reinforced by religion. Extreme weather was rarely understood as a natural system behaving badly. It was interpreted morally. A long frost or a sudden storm might be seen as a warning from God, or a punishment, or a call to repentance. The response to severe weather often involved prayer, fasting, special services, not any kind of practical intervention like, salting the roads. The Tudors didn't believe that weather could be managed or anticipated with precision. It was to be endured, interpreted, survived, but definitely not something that you could work out on a schedule. So when a winter storm arrived, it didn't feel like the culmination of a countdown. It felt like something that had descended without warning. And that meant that preparation looked very, very different from what we would recognize today. People prepared for winter, not storms. So they didn't prepare for specific storms in isolation. Preparation was seasonal, not reactive. We actually did an episode maybe 2 years ago on how the Tudors prepared for winter, so I'll link to that somewhere too. People braced themselves for winter as a whole, knowing that once the cold set in, there would be very little that they could do to respond to sudden disruptions. Now, food was the most important concern, the first concern. Households that could afford to did their preserving long before winter arrived. Grain was stored, meat was salted or smoked, fish was dried, ale and beer were brewed not just for drinking, but also as dependable sources of calories. These stores were meant to last through the entire season because winter travel was slow even in the best of conditions. Markets still functioned in the winter, but the whole system was really fragile. Roads could become muddy or frozen with little warning. A heavy snowfall could stop carts altogether. A storm didn't create shortages out of nowhere. It just exposed how thin the margins already were. When supply slowed or stopped, prices rose quickly, and the poorest households felt it first. Now, fuel was just as critical. I know for us today, they're like, put gas in the car and get the groceries, right? So it's similar. But they had firewood that had to be gathered and stockpiled early. Once the deep cold set in, collecting would become more difficult or impossible. Long winters could lead to fuel scarcity, forcing families to ration their heat or go without. In prolonged cold spells, the ability to keep a fire going was the difference between life and death, especially for the elderly and the very young. Clothing and shelter mattered too, although they offered little protection against the sustained cold. Layers were essential, just like they tell us now, layer up. Beds were piled high with blankets, hangings were used to keep the warmth in around the bed. People would often sleep close together, sharing heat in ways that would feel really uncomfortable today, but were practical responses to cold interiors. None of these preparations assumed a specific storm. They assumed a general vulnerability. Winter was dangerous by default, and severe storms simply intensified the risks that were already present. So, when a heavy snow or a long frost arrived, the question wasn't how to get ready, it was how long existing preparations were going to hold. When a major winter storm arrived in Tudor England, its impact was immediate and cumulative. Snow itself wasn't the greatest danger, cold that lingered was. And that's actually what they're telling us about this storm. It's not going to so much be the amount of snow that we're going to get on Sunday, but it's going to be the cold and the winds that are going to set in afterwards. So, all very similar to what the Tudors experienced. The roads, just like today, were the first problem. England's transport network depended on dirt roads that quickly became impassable in heavy snow or prolonged frost. Carts stopped moving, animals struggled, messages slowed or failed to arrive at all. Even a short interruption could isolate villages and towns that relied on regular market traffic. Markets were the next casualty. Food didn't vanish overnight, but supply would slow sharply. Grain that normally arrived from nearby regions might not come at all. Fish couldn't be transported inland. Fresh produce disappeared quickly. As the supply tightened, prices rose. This pattern is visible again and again and again in early modern records. Weather shock followed by price shock. Fuel shortages often would follow close behind. When the cold would stretch on for longer than expected, households burned through their stores of wood and coal faster than planned. Once roads were blocked, replacing that fuel became very difficult. Poorer families, already living right on the edge, were the first to suffer. Parish authorities struggled to respond, especially if the cold affected an entire region at once. The Tudor Poor Laws, which culminated in the very famous 1601 Elizabethan Poor Law, was partly responsible to handle these kinds of crises. Parishes were legally required to provide relief to the local poor, but severe weather could overwhelm these systems quite quickly. When cold hit multiple parishes simultaneously, there wasn't a larger safety net to fall back on. Livestock losses added another layer of damage. Animals weakened by cold and lack of fodder died in significant numbers during severe winters. That loss didn't just affect the food in the moment, it reduced agricultural capacity in the seasons that followed, turning a bad winter storm into a longer-term crisis. What made these storms so frightening was their uncertainty. There was no sense of how long the disruption would last. A frost might break after a few days, or it might persist for weeks. People had no way of knowing. Each passing day increased the anxiety, especially for those whose survival depended on daily labor or access to markets. Today, we prepare for storms knowing that they will end. The Tudors endured storms without that reassurance. And when winter pushed beyond what anyone expected, it left marks that could last long after the snow melted. Tudor writers didn't name storms the way that we do today. There wasn't any equivalent of the blizzard of 78. Instead, they noticed when winters crossed an invisible expected line, when cold lasted too long, when rivers froze solid, when ordinary hardship tipped into something more dangerous. Chroniclers like Camden and John Stowe repeatedly remarked on severe frosts during the 16th century, especially when they disrupted everyday life in London. John Stowe noted the frozen rivers, unusual cold, the strain that these conditions placed on cities and markets. What matters here is not that he gives us dramatic snowfall descriptions, but that he flags winters that felt abnormal, even to people who were accustomed to bad weather. That tells us that these weren't routine seasonal complaints, but moments when winter became a problem worth recording. The 1560s were a particularly difficult decade. Harvests failed multiple times, grain prices rose sharply, and the poor relief system faced unprecedented strain. Cold winters were part of that picture, but they didn't act alone. Bad weather combined with disease and population pressure and economic disruption, and that created a cascade of crises. When winter hit during these years, it intensified existing stress, turning difficult years into dangerous ones. So if you had, for example, a bad harvest because of too much rain over the summer that messed the crops up. Then you weren't going to have enough food for the winter, and then the winter was going to be harder, and that would kind of pile on itself because then you would have fewer workers and fewer animals the next year, which could lead to another bad harvest. So it would just get worse. You'd get caught in this circle of badness. And this pattern, that's a technical term too, I will say, the circle of badness. Anyway, this pattern repeated itself throughout the Tudor period. Winter severity alone rarely caused a catastrophe, but it could tip a fragile situation into collapse. A cold snap that closed roads during a year of good harvests was manageable, but the same weather during a year of grain shortage could trigger a mass starvation. To see how these patterns played out when winter truly overstayed its welcome, we can look just beyond the Tudor period to the early 17th century. The winter of 1607 to 1608, followed by the even more severe frost of 1608 to 1609, brought prolonged cold across England. The Thames froze solid enough that people held a frost fair on the ice. There were markets, entertainments, and cooking fires set up on the frozen river. This became the first documented frost fair, although the river had frozen before. I did a whole episode on frost fair, so we can talk about that in that episode. Edmund Howells and other chroniclers described trade grinding to a halt and daily life being disrupted for extended periods. These weren't short shocks, but drawn-out crises. The infrastructure was the same that it had been under Elizabeth I, and the vulnerabilities were the same, but the only difference was the duration. When cold stayed long enough, it exposed the limits of preparation in a society that could plan for winter, but not for how long winter was going to last. Tudor winter storms were rarely a dramatic single event like we are preparing for right now, but they were slow-building emergencies. And without forecasting, people often didn't realize how serious the situation was going to be until they were already deep inside it. What makes the current moment that we're in right now so striking isn't just the size of the storm, but how much advance notice we have. People were already talking about it last weekend. So days before the snow falls, we see it forming. Meteorologists are tracking it on Super Doppler rate across the country. Emergency plans are activated, supply chains are adjusting. People argue online about whether the forecasts are exaggerated, but even that debate rests on shared information, and none of that existed in the Tudor world. When a storm arrived in the 16th century, it felt sudden, even if the winter had already been cold. There wasn't the countdown, there wasn't this shared expectation of when conditions were going to improve. Snow might fall heavily overnight. Frost might simply refuse to lift day after day after day. People woke up inside the storm without knowing how long they were going to be trapped there, and that uncertainty shaped everything. Decisions couldn't be made with confidence because there wasn't any timeline to work with. Should you ration your food now, hoping that markets would reopen soon? Should you burn fuel freely to stay warm or conserve it to risk the cold later? Travel while conditions are bad or wait and risk being cut off entirely? Modern storm preparation is built around this idea of interruption. We expect normal life to pause and then resume. Tudor life didn't work that way. A winter storm didn't feel like a pause where you can settle in and get cozy and play board game. It felt like a test of whether the systems holding daily life together would continue to function at all. The human response is familiar. Anxiety rises, people look to authorities for guidance, communities strain under unequal pressure. Those with resources fare better than those without. Fear of scarcity spreads faster than the weather itself. The difference isn't emotional, it's just how much information we have. We prepare today because we know what's coming. I'm about to head out to the grocery store and see if there's any bread, milk, and eggs left. The Tudors endured because they didn't know what was coming. That contrast helps to explain why winter loomed so large in Tudor memory. It wasn't just cold, it was unknowable. And in a world without forecasts, not knowing when the storm would end could be more frightening than the storm itself. Today we prepare with a sense of control because we know when the storm is coming, we have a rough idea of how bad it's going to be, we know when it's going to end, Monday morning. Even when storms are dangerous, they arrive with a timeline, and the Tudors never had that. They prepared for winter as best they could. They stored what they were able, and they watched the weather closely for signs that things were turning worse. But once the snow fell or the frost settled in, they entered a period of uncertainty. There was no way to know whether the cold was going to last for days or weeks, whether the markets would reopen, or whether the stored food and fuel was going to stretch far enough. And that uncertainty is what made winter so powerful. Not because the snow was rare or the cold was unexpected, but the prolonged disruption could just unravel everyday life. So as we watch this storm approach, track its path, stock our shelves with the confidence that help and information are close at hand, the contrast is really stark for me. Winter would come for the Tudors without warning, storms would arrive without forecasts, and every snowfall carried a question that no one could answer, which is, how long is this going to last? So we will leave it there, friends. I hope that if you are in the path of this storm, you are preparing and have everything you need and are going to enjoy it as best you can. Like I said, I'm about to head out to the grocery store. I don't know what's going to be left. It's Friday morning. It's not supposed to hit until Saturday after midnight. So we'll see. I don't normally do my grocery run until like Sunday or Monday. So when we first heard about the storm on Tuesday, I still had a full fridge and I didn't want to go out shopping then because it's like there wasn't any room in the fridge because I still had a full fridge. But now my fridge is emptier and I can go get some more. So we'll see what's left. I might not get the same brand of bread that I normally get. Whatever. It's all good. I'm going to get some new board games too. What else do you get to prepare for a storm? I was thinking about what I should have. So also we need a new snow shovel because our snow shovel kind of broke the last. It's still usable. If I can't get a new one, it's not the end of the world. But I would like to get a new snow shovel, but I don't know if there's any left. I might have to ask my parents if they have an extra one that they can bring to me or that I can go pick up. So we have enough ice melt, salt stuff, the snow shovel, board games. We've got plenty of board games, flashlights, extra batteries, soup, food. Our stove and our heat is gas, so I'm not worried about warmth. I'm not worried about that stuff. Plenty of candles. You know, I'm a big fan of candles, so always have plenty of candles on hand. What else should I get other than bread and milk and eggs? Actually, I have a very long shopping list. I asked my husband and my daughter what all they wanted, and I've got a whole big list here that's 2 pages because it seems like I think I'm going to be inside for 6 months. I don't know, but I just would rather be prepared than what. So I'm about to take my notebook and head out to the grocery store. I hope that you are preparing if you're in the path of this storm, and let me know what you're doing to prepare. I would love to know what all you've got to think about. And if there's anything that I'm not thinking about that I should, let me know that too while we still have time. Yeah, like I said, I used to live in the mountains above Los Angeles, mountains of Big Bear area. And it wasn't a storm unless we got 2 feet. Like this whole 18 inches, that's cute. And then we lived in southern Spain for 7 years and there was no snow. Well, there was a little bit because we were at altitude. There's a little bit, but not very much. So, you know, I've kind of gotten accustomed to not having big storms. And I think that if 10 years ago me living in the mountains could look at me now, she'd be like, what's your problem? What are you freaking out over 18 inches? Like, that's cute again. But yeah, me now is freaking out over 18 inches. Anyway, my friends, we'll leave it there for now. If you enjoyed this video, I sure would appreciate it. Press that like button. You know what it does. It helps to feed the algorithm and get our content to more people. And I hope that if I don't already have it, I earned your subscription to my channel where I put out content like this on the regular. I have done episodes, like I said, on preparing for winter and on frost fairs. If you want to watch that frost fair episode, you can do that right here. Or here's a video that YouTube thinks you'll like. Thank you so much for being here. Remember, my friend, you are deeply loved. I'm so glad I shared the planet with you. You make the world a better place, and I'm so grateful we got to spend this time with each other talking about Tudor winters. I'll be back very soon. In the meantime, don't forget to drink your water. Bye-bye.